Oprah Winfrey was already moving before anyone understood what she was doing. She stood up from the guest chair, not slowly, not gracefully, the way a person stands when they have made a considered decision, but suddenly, the way a person stands when something inside them overrides everything else. And she walked off the stage, down the steps, into the audience. Jimmy Fallon stood at his desk, his hand still extended toward the chair she had just left, his mouth open, no words forming. The band stopped. The cameras scrambled. And 300 people who had come to a television taping on a Wednesday night in New York watched Oprah Winfrey move through their rows with the focused, unstoppable energy of someone who had just seen something that could not wait one more second. It was a Wednesday evening in March 2024. The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon. Oprah Winfrey was the guest, in town for a series of press commitments and appearing on the show simply because the timing worked, and because Jimmy had wanted her for months. The audience had erupted the moment she walked out. This was Oprah, the woman who had built an empire not on glamour or spectacle, but on something rarer. The ability to make every single person she looked at feel as though they were the only person in the room. She was 70 years old, and she walked onto that stage like someone who had made a long peace with exactly who she was. The interview had been warm and easy, the kind of conversation that moves like a river, full and unhurried. And then, at a moment when nothing had been announced, nothing had been planned, Jimmy had gestured toward the audience for a reason entirely unrelated to what was about to happen. And Oprah had looked out. Her eyes had swept the rows the way a person's eyes sweep a room when they are only half looking. And then they stopped. Her expression did not crumble. It did not break. It did something more precise and more total than either of those things. It reset, as if every layer of composure, every professional surface, every carefully maintained equilibrium had simply been switched off, leaving only the face underneath, the real one, the one she had been carrying since 1986. She stood up. Jimmy reached for her arm on instinct. "Oprah, hey." She was already gone. The entire studio went still. The director in the control room did not cut to commercial. The cameramen held their positions and simply followed her. The audience parted instinctively, row by row, as she moved through them. Nobody spoke. They didn't know what they were witnessing. They only knew they were witnessing something. Had something gone wrong? Was someone hurt? The audience scanned the rows around them, trying to understand. All they could see was Oprah moving with absolute purpose toward the far left section of the middle rows, where a woman was sitting very still, both hands pressed to her mouth. Then Oprah stopped. She stood in the aisle. She looked at the woman. The woman looked at her. And Oprah said, in a voice that was not a whisper, but was barely more than one, caught perfectly by her microphone, "I have been looking for you for 38 years. To understand what happened on that stage in March 2024, you need to understand what happened in the winter of 1986. Oprah Winfrey wasn't always Oprah Winfrey, icon and legend. In 1986, she was 32 years old, and the Oprah Winfrey Show had been national for less than 3 months. The syndication had happened quickly, almost violently fast, and the world was still calibrating to the scale of what she had become. She was calibrating too. She had grown up poor in rural Mississippi, had survived things she would spend decades finding the language for, had clawed toward every room she now occupied with a determination that people called talent because talent was a more comfortable explanation. She was not yet the institution. She was still becoming. In December of that year, she was in Chicago for a taping, her own studio, her own show. But the weight of the national audience was still new, and she felt it every morning when she arrived at work. It was a Friday, and it had been a hard week. One of her producers had quit without warning. A segment had fallen apart in the edit. She had done an interview that morning that had gone wrong in the specific way that interviews go wrong when a guest is in more pain than anyone had accounted for. And she had carried that pain home with her the way she always did, which was entirely. She left the studio late, close to 9 in the evening. The building was in the West Loop, and the streets outside were cold and largely empty. The particular emptiness of a Chicago Friday night in winter, when the wind comes off the lake and turns the city into something that belongs to people who have no other choice but to be in it. She was walking to her car, her coat pulled close, thinking about nothing in particular, because she was too tired to think about anything with focus. There was a woman sitting on the steps of the building across the street. She was perhaps 60 years old. She was wearing a coat that was not warm enough for December in Chicago. She had a paper bag beside her, and her hands were folded in her lap with a stillness that was not peace, the stillness of a person who has stopped expecting anything to change. Oprah had grown up around that stillness. She knew it the way you know the weather of the place you are from. She crossed the street. The woman's name was Marvella Cole. She was 61 years old, originally from Jackson, Mississippi, a fact that she and Oprah discovered in the first 2 minutes of talking, both of them pausing when they named it, both of them understanding, without saying so, what it meant to have traveled the same geography toward such different destinations. Marvella had come to Chicago in 1974 to live with her daughter, who had since moved to Ohio. She had worked for 11 years as a school cafeteria aide, and then the school had closed, and the work had not been replaced by other work in any durable way. And here was where that had led. They sat on those steps together for nearly an hour. Oprah did not perform concern. She was not there in any official capacity. There were no cameras, no producers, no publicists. There was only a 32-year-old woman from Mississippi who recognized something in the stillness of another woman from Mississippi and could not walk past it. They talked about Jackson, about the particular quality of summer heat in that part of the world, about Marvella's daughter in Ohio who called on Sundays, about what Marvella had been good at. She had been very good at working with children who needed patience, children who arrived at school before they were ready to learn anything. And she had understood how to give them a quiet space to become ready. That gift had a name, Oprah told her. What you're describing is a gift, and it has a name, and it is not nothing. Before she left, Oprah went back to her production building. She was there for 45 minutes. When she returned, she had a card for a woman at a social services organization she trusted, and she had written on the back of the card, in her own handwriting, a sentence. She pressed the card into Marvella's hands, and she said, "You call her Monday morning, and you tell her I sent you." She looked at Marvella directly. Monday morning, not someday. Monday. Then she got in her car and drove home. She had thought about Marvella Cole many times after that night. She thought about her on the Monday, hoping she had called. She thought about her the following winter when the cold came back and made Chicago into that particular city again. She had no way of following up. She did not have a last name at the time, only Marvella, only Jackson, only a face and a pair of folded hands on December steps. The years moved, as years do when a life is accelerating, and the specific face softened at the edges the way memories soften when they are not reinforced by photographs or conversations. But the feeling of it never softened. The feeling of it stayed exactly as it was, sharp and unresolved, because she had never known what happened next. She had wondered, For 38 years, what happened next? Subscribe and leave a comment because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Behind the scenes, the answer had arrived 11 weeks before that March evening, in the form of an email to the general inquiry address of Oprah's production company. The email was written by a woman named Denise Cole Patterson, 63 years old, living in Cincinnati, Ohio. She identified herself as Marvella Cole's daughter. She wrote that her mother was 89 years old and still living, still sharp, still one of the most patient and quietly extraordinary people she had ever known. She wrote that her mother had talked about one night in Chicago in December 1986 for the rest of her life. Not obsessively, not bitterly, but with a specific and abiding gratitude. The way a person talks about something that arrived at exactly the right moment and changed the direction of everything that followed. She wrote that Marvella had called that Monday morning, that the woman at the organization had taken her call and taken her seriously, that within 6 months, Marvella had been placed in a role supporting children with developmental delays at a nonprofit in Chicago's South Side. Work that fit her so precisely that she had stayed for 14 years until her retirement. That she had eventually moved to Cincinnati to be near Denise and her grandchildren. That her life had been a good one, full and purposeful. And that a 32-year-old woman who had sat down on some steps on a cold Friday night in December was the reason it had gone the way it had gone. Denise wrote that she was not asking for anything. She was writing because her mother was 89, and time was not something that could be taken for granted anymore. And she felt that Oprah Winfrey deserved to know that what she had done had mattered. That the wondering, if she had ever wondered, could stop. The email had reached Oprah's team within hours, and Oprah herself within a day. What was arranged after that was arranged entirely by Oprah, without The Tonight Show's knowledge. She had been booked on the show for weeks. She called Denise back personally. She asked whether Marvella was well enough to travel to New York. Denise said yes, her mother was 89, but she was formidable, and she had always wanted to see New York. Oprah asked that they tell Marvella only that she was being invited to be part of a television studio audience as a guest. Nothing more. She asked Denise to bring her mother to Rockefeller Center on Wednesday evening and to seat her in the left center section, middle rows. And she asked that no one, not the Tonight Show producers, not the booking team, not anyone in the building, be told why. Jimmy Fallon had been told 90 seconds before the taping began. He had said yes before the sentence was finished. Marvella Cole, 89 years old, had come to New York believing she was seeing a television show. She was wearing a burgundy dress that Denise had helped her pick out, and low heels she had owned for 20 years. And she had looked around the Tonight Show studio with the calm, attentive interest of a woman who finds the world genuinely worth looking at. She had not known who else was booked. She had not known that the woman who would walk out onto that stage was the same woman who had sat beside her on a set of concrete steps in the winter of 1986. She had recognized her in the way you recognize someone you have held in your memory for decades. Not immediately, not with certainty, but with a trembling that begins in the chest before the mind has fully caught up. Oprah reached the row. She stopped at the aisle seat. Marvella had not stood. She looked up at Oprah the way a person looks at something they have half believed was not entirely real. "I never knew your last name," Oprah said. Her voice was steady, but only just. "I only ever knew Marvella from Jackson." The woman in the burgundy dress lowered her hands from her mouth. "You sat down," she said. "You didn't have to sit down." "Of course I sat down. People don't always sit down." Oprah reached out and took both of Marvella's hands in hers. "Did you call on Monday?" Marvella looked at her for a long moment. Then something moved across her face, not a smile exactly, more the expression of a person who has just been asked the question they have carried the answer to for 38 years. "First thing," she said. 8 o'clock Monday morning. Jimmy Fallon, standing at the front of the stage, watching all of this through a monitor his director had positioned for him, pressed his hand flat against his chest. He did not speak. He did not move back to his desk. He stood at the edge of the stage in front of 300 people who were no longer audience members in any ordinary sense, but witnesses. And he let what was happening in that aisle be exactly what it was, without any professional frame around it. The cameraman in the aisle had tears running freely down his face, and he did not wipe them. The floor director, 15 years of live television behind her, stood with her clipboard at her side and did not lift it. In the control room, the director had both hands flat on the desk in front of him, looking at the feed, not saying a word into anyone's headset. But this is the moment no one in the studio and no one watching at home ever saw coming. Oprah reached into the inside pocket of her jacket. She removed a small envelope, cream-colored, sealed, with nothing written on the outside. She held it for a moment. Then she placed it in Marvella's hands. "I wrote this 14 years ago," Oprah said. "I wrote it because I couldn't find you, and I needed somewhere to put what I wanted to say. I've carried it ever since. Every time I moved offices, every time I thought about you, I didn't know if I'd ever find the right person to give it to." Marvella held the envelope with both hands. She did not open it. "You don't have to open it now," Oprah said. "I know," Marvella said. She pressed it carefully against her chest. "I'll open it when I'm home. With Denise." Oprah nodded. Then she did something that Jimmy Fallon would describe in interviews for months afterward. As the moment he understood something he had not understood before about what it means to actually see another person. She sat down, right there in the aisle on the floor of the Tonight Show studio, beside Marvella Cole's seat. Not in a chair, on the floor, cross-legged the way a child sits. And she looked up at Marvella, and she said, "Tell me about the children, the ones you worked with. Tell me what that was like." And Marvella Cole, 89 years old, in a burgundy dress she had saved for New York, looked down at Oprah Winfrey sitting on the floor of a television studio and began to talk about the children, about the ones who arrived too early in the morning and too hungry to learn anything, about the particular kind of patience that was not waiting but was more like presence, just being there, reliably, every day, until a child understood that the world could contain something steady. She talked for 7 minutes. Oprah did not interrupt once. When she finished, the studio was completely silent. Then someone in the back row began to applaud, slowly, not performatively, the way a person applauds when they are not thinking about applauding but simply cannot contain what is in their hands. And it spread. And 300 people rose to their feet. And Jimmy Fallon stood at the front of the stage and let it all happen without saying a word. Because there was nothing to say, and he knew it. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. Denise Cole Patterson flew her mother home to Cincinnati 2 days later. On the flight back, somewhere over Pennsylvania, Marvella opened the envelope. Denise would only say, afterward, that it took her mother a long time to read it, and that she read it twice, and that she folded it very carefully before she placed it back inside. The letter has never been made public. Marvella has never described its contents. She has only said, when asked, she remembered everything right. Marvella Cole turned 90 years old in August of that year. Her birthday party was held at Denise's house in Cincinnati. 34 people in a backyard, a cake with too many candles. Among the cards that arrived by mail that morning was one with no return address, postmarked from California. Inside, in handwriting that Denise recognized immediately, 2 sentences. The family has never shared what those 2 sentences were. They didn't need to. Some people sit down beside you in the dark before they are famous. And the ones who do are famous for exactly that reason, whether the world knows it or not.